As of this morning, the United States is applying a 25% tariff on imports of steel and aluminum. We deeply regret this measure. Tariffs are taxes. They are bad for business and worse for consumers. They are disrupting supply chains.
The announcement sent shockwaves through the international financial community as the newly elected United States president declared a series of sweeping tariffs on long-standing trade partners. This dramatic shift in trade policy was framed as an effort to protect domestic industries and rebalance an economy that had long been intertwined with global markets. In response, a powerful and unprecedented countermeasure emerged from across the Atlantic, where European leaders unveiled a retaliatory economic package valued at $50 billion. The measure, designed as a strategic economic counterattack, immediately reconfigured the contours of transatlantic trade and underscored the fraught nature of modern economic diplomacy. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The decision by the United States to impose tariffs represented more than a mere adjustment to trade policy. It signaled a fundamental rethinking of how the nation would engage with its global partners. The move was underpinned by a belief that traditional trade agreements had eroded American competitiveness and that a more protectionist stance would revive domestic manufacturing and employment. The announcement was met with a mixture of applause from nationalist segments of the electorate and concern from international investors who had grown accustomed to decades of relatively free global trade. The tariffs were not limited to a single sector, but spanned a range of goods, from raw materials and industrial components to high-tech products, thereby touching virtually every facet of the American economy. European leaders, long cautious in their approach to economic disputes with the United States, found themselves compelled to react swiftly and forcefully. The European response was meticulously coordinated among member states, each contributing to an overall package that was both broad in scope and deeply punitive in its financial implications. The decision to mobilize a $50 billion economic response was not taken lightly. It was the culmination of extensive consultations among policymakers, economic strategists, and political leaders who recognized that a measured yet firm counteraction was necessary to defend European economic interests and the broader framework of international trade norms. The measure was presented as a safeguard designed to ensure that the rules-based international order would not be allowed to disintegrate under the strain of unilateral economic coercion. In the complex interplay of modern global economics, the concept of retaliation had evolved into a finely tuned instrument of statecraft. The European counterattack was built on a multifaceted strategy that sought to exploit vulnerabilities in the American economic infrastructure. By leveraging their significant economic clout and integrated market, European nations sought not only to impose immediate financial costs on the United States, but also to create long-term strategic dislocations. This approach was emblematic of a broader shift in international relations, where economic measures could be as potent and far-reaching as traditional military deterrents. The European strategy involved a series of targeted sanctions, adjustments to regulatory frameworks, and recalibrations of trade flows that were designed to isolate specific sectors of the American economy and undermine investor confidence. As the ramifications of these bold moves began to unfold, it became clear that the United States was facing challenges on multiple fronts. The tariffs, intended to protect domestic industries, instead disrupted established supply chains and increased costs for American companies that relied on imported components. The immediate effect was a surge in uncertainty, as businesses struggled to navigate the new landscape marked by a barrage of regulatory shifts and shifting market dynamics. The European economic retaliation, with its staggering $50 billion magnitude, compounded these challenges by triggering a cascade of reactions across financial markets. The intricate web of global trade had suddenly become a battleground where even minor miscalculations could lead to dramatic economic consequences. The political narrative that emerged in the wake of these events was charged with a sense of dramatic inevitability. Both sides marshaled rhetoric that framed the conflict as a struggle between protectionist nationalism and the old order of free trade. In the United States, the tariffs were heralded by supporters as a necessary corrective to years of economic decline and unfair trade practices. In Europe, the economic countermeasures were positioned as a principled stand in defense of multilateral cooperation and the integrity of international economic law. This battle of narratives played out in boardrooms, on television screens, and within the corridors of political power, as each side strove to convince both domestic and international audiences of the righteousness of its course. Underlying the economic maneuvers were deep-seated ideological differences that had long simmered beneath the surface of transatlantic relations. The United States had embraced a form of economic populism that cast global markets as a threat to national sovereignty and economic self-determination. The tariffs were a tangible expression of this worldview, a declaration that American interests must come first, regardless of the disruptions it might cause in the established global order. European leaders, in contrast, viewed the free flow of goods and capital as the cornerstone of modern economic stability. Their response was imbued with a belief that economic interdependence was not merely a source of wealth, but also a guarantor of peace and stability. The clash of these philosophies created a dialectic in which each side sought to not only advance its immediate economic interests, but also to redefine the rules of engagement for the future. The mechanics of the European economic retaliation were both sophisticated and expansive. A series of coordinated measures were deployed to target key sectors of the American economy that were particularly vulnerable to shifts in trade patterns. These included adjustments to import tariffs on American-made goods, strategic investments in alternative markets to reduce dependence on American products, and enhancements to regulatory standards that would indirectly raise the cost of doing business for American companies operating in European markets. This multifaceted strategy was designed to hit where it hurt most, undermining the economic assumptions that had long underpinned American policy. The sheer scale of the financial commitment, $50 billion, underscored the determination of European policymakers to assert the primacy of international law and economic fairness over unilateral action. Within the United States, the immediate impact on the economy was profound. The initial shock of the tariffs, combined with the swift and severe European response, led to a rapid contraction in investor confidence. Financial markets, which had been buoyant in the wake of positive domestic indicators, found themselves in a state of sudden and turbulent uncertainty. The interconnected nature of global trade meant that disruptions in one area quickly spilled over into others, creating a feedback loop that exacerbated economic vulnerabilities. Industries that had once enjoyed a competitive advantage found themselves reeling as costs escalated and market dynamics shifted in unexpected ways. The resultant economic turmoil was not confined to a single sector, but rippled throughout the entire national economy, affecting everything from consumer spending to industrial production. The broader implications of these developments were as complex as they were far-reaching. The aggressive stance taken by the European Union signaled a willingness to abandon the conventional wisdom that had long governed international trade relations. It demonstrated that even in an era characterized by interdependence and globalization, states could still resort to economically destructive measures as a means of achieving their objectives. This revelation had a destabilizing effect on global trade norms, prompting other nations to reevaluate their own positions and strategies. The incident served as a stark reminder that the international economic system was not immune to the kind of ideological fervor and strategic brinksmanship that had historically been associated with traditional forms of conflict. Economic policy analysts began to dissect the underlying assumptions that had driven both sides to such extremes. They noted that the American reliance on tariffs as a tool of economic policy was fraught with inherent contradictions. While tariffs were intended to protect domestic industries, they also disrupted the delicate balance of trade that had been cultivated over decades of globalization. The resulting distortion of market incentives was seen as a recipe for long-term economic instability, as industries that had once thrived on global supply chains were forced to adapt to an environment of isolationism and protectionism. In parallel, the European counteroffensive was scrutinized for its potential to set dangerous precedents. By engaging in a form of economic warfare that was both aggressive and financially burdensome, European policymakers risked entangling their economies in a conflict that could reverberate for generations. At the heart of this turbulent episode was the stark realization that the global economy was increasingly vulnerable to political whims and short-term calculations. The incident laid bare the limitations of traditional economic safeguards and the perilous consequences of substituting strategic ambition for measured policy. The decision to deploy a $50 billion economic weapon was not merely an isolated act of retaliation. It was emblematic of a broader trend in which states were willing to engage in high-stakes gambits that could upend established economic relationships. This shift represented a radical departure from the post-war consensus on trade, where cooperation and mutual benefit had largely supplanted zero-sum confrontations. The immediate financial implications of the European action were mirrored by a profound shift in the geopolitical landscape. Nations around the world were forced to confront the reality that the old rules of engagement no longer held sway. The transatlantic alliance, once seen as a bulwark of shared economic and security interests, found itself at a crossroads as conflicting national priorities came to the fore. European leaders, in their determination to defend the international order, adopted a stance that was as much about preserving their own economic sovereignty as it was about sending a clear message to the United States. The resulting tensions had the potential to reshape not only bilateral relations, but also the broader dynamics of international politics, as other nations recalibrated their own positions in response to the unfolding crisis. Central to the unfolding drama was the role of media and public opinion in shaping perceptions of the conflict. In the United States, the narrative of economic resurgence through protectionism was a potent rallying cry that resonated with a significant segment of the population. This perspective was bolstered by a long-standing belief in American exceptionalism and the idea that domestic prosperity could be achieved by standing firm against global competition. On the European side, the response was framed as a principled defense of multilateralism and the integrity of international institutions. This dichotomy in messaging fueled a polarization that extended beyond the realms of economic policy and into the broader social and political fabric of both societies. The dynamics of this economic confrontation underscored the intricate relationship between policy decisions and market psychology. Investors, already jittery from the uncertainty of a rapidly shifting economic landscape, found themselves caught in a maelstrom of conflicting signals. The imposition of tariffs and the subsequent retaliatory measures created a climate of apprehension that undermined long-term planning and stifled innovation. In this environment, businesses were forced to re-examine their strategies, weighing the risks of exposure to volatile markets against the potential rewards of continued engagement in a system that had, until recently, been characterized by relative stability and predictability. In exploring the deeper implications of this crisis, it is essential to consider the symbolic resonance of the measures adopted by both sides. The unilateral decision by the United States to impose tariffs was seen by many as a repudiation of the globalized economic model that had for decades underpinned international prosperity. It was a move that suggested that national interests could and should supersede the collective good. The European response, with its staggering financial scope, was equally symbolic. It conveyed a powerful message that the international community would not stand idly by in the face of perceived economic injustice. This exchange of economic firepower was not simply a transactional dispute. It was a contest of visions about the future direction of the global economy. The intricate dance of economic aggression and counter-aggression also exposed the vulnerabilities inherent in highly integrated financial systems. The global economy, interconnected by an intricate network of trade, capital flows, and regulatory frameworks, was suddenly confronted with a test of its resilience. The shockwaves generated by the imposition of tariffs and the ensuing European countermeasures reverberated through financial markets, sending ripples of uncertainty through investment portfolios and corporate balance sheets. The cascading effects of these actions were felt across continents, highlighting the extent to which national economic policies could no longer be insulated from the broader dynamics of global finance. A critical dimension of this unfolding scenario was the manner in which both sides sought to manage their domestic constituencies. In the United States, the rhetoric of economic revitalization was used to galvanize support among voters who had grown disillusioned with the status quo. The promise of protecting domestic jobs and industries resonated deeply, even as the practical implications of the tariffs introduced new challenges for companies operating on an international scale. In Europe, the counterattack was portrayed as a necessary measure to safeguard not only economic interests, but also the broader principles of fairness and reciprocity that had long underpinned the global trading system. The interplay of domestic political imperatives and international economic strategy was laid bare in the rapid escalation of the dispute, revealing the complex calculus that policymakers had to navigate. The decision to deploy a financial weapon of such unprecedented scale was a testament to the evolving nature of economic statecraft. Gone were the days when trade disputes could be managed through incremental adjustments and quiet negotiations. The events of this period revealed that in the modern era, economic power could be wielded as a blunt instrument capable of reshaping entire economies. The sheer magnitude of the European retaliation set against the backdrop of American protectionism served as a stark illustration of the risks inherent in abandoning the principles of free trade and multilateral cooperation. This confrontation, marked by its dramatic scale and far-reaching implications, signaled a turning point in the conduct of international economic policy. Within this turbulent context, the immediate implications for market stability were profound. The uncertainty that accompanied the imposition of tariffs and the subsequent retaliatory measures led to heightened volatility across financial markets. Investors, caught between the dual pressures of domestic policy shifts and international countermeasures, faced an environment where traditional risk assessments no longer applied. The volatility was further exacerbated by the rapid transmission of economic shocks through global supply chains, as companies struggled to recalibrate their operations in response to a new and unpredictable trade landscape. The financial turmoil that ensued was emblematic of a broader trend toward the politicization of economic policy, where ideological commitments increasingly overshadowed pragmatic considerations. At the heart of this unfolding drama was a fundamental contest over the very nature of economic power and its role in the modern state. The events that transpired underscored a growing recognition that the tools of economic policy, tariffs, sanctions, and countermeasures, had evolved into instruments of geopolitical strategy. The clash between American unilateralism and European multilateralism was not merely a dispute over trade balances, it was a profound contest over the future trajectory of the global economic order. Each side believed that its approach was not only correct, but also essential for ensuring long-term stability and prosperity. In this contest, the stakes were nothing less than the redefinition of the rules that governed international economic relations. The strategic calculus behind the European economic attack was driven by a clear-eyed assessment of both opportunity and risk. European policymakers recognized that the imposition of tariffs by the United States represented a direct challenge to the established order, a challenge that could potentially undermine the very foundations of the global economic system. The decision to mobilize a counteroffensive of $50 billion was motivated by the belief that decisive action was necessary to deter further unilateral measures and to reassert the primacy of international cooperation. This move was not simply about punishing the United States. It was about sending a resounding message to the world that economic coercion would not be tolerated, and that the principles of fairness and reciprocity remained non-negotiable. A further layer of complexity was added by the interplay between domestic and international political dynamics. In the United States, the new administration's emphasis on economic nationalism resonated with a significant portion of the electorate. But it also sowed seeds of uncertainty among business leaders and investors who had long benefited from the stability of open markets. European leaders, cognizant of the potential for spillover effects, sought to balance their commitment to economic principles with the need to preserve stability within their own markets. This balancing act was fraught with inherent tensions, as the imposition of severe economic measures risked alienating not only American partners but also domestic constituencies that were wary of the potential costs associated with prolonged trade disputes. The incident also raised critical questions about the sustainability of a global economic system that was increasingly subject to political manipulation. The rapid escalation of the conflict demonstrated that economic interdependence, once hailed as a cornerstone of global peace and prosperity, could be turned into a weapon in the hands of political actors. The $50 billion counterattack was a vivid illustration of how economic tools could be deployed in a manner that transcended traditional trade negotiations, entering the realm of high-stakes geopolitical maneuvering. This transformation of economic policy into a strategic weapon introduced a new set of risks and uncertainties, challenging long-held assumptions about the stability and predictability of global markets. The narrative that emerged from this dramatic episode was one of both confrontation and transformation. The clash between the United States and the European Union served as a potent reminder that the global economy was not an immutable system, but rather a dynamic and contested space, subject to the forces of political ambition and strategic calculation. The decision to engage in an economic confrontation of such unprecedented scale was a bold declaration that traditional notions of sovereignty and economic independence were being redefined in real time. The unfolding events forced policymakers, economists, and market participants to grapple with a reality in which the boundaries between domestic and international policy were increasingly blurred, and where the tools of economic management were rapidly evolving to meet new challenges. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on the EU's $50 billion retaliation? Will it crush the US economy? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.